Council housing exemplars, moved by Glenn Livingston, seconded by Pauline Cotter. I'll open that up for questions. Phil Clearwater.
Well, mine is really just to check with staff my assessment, because clearly the committee didn't come to a clear decision around the exemplars, and it's basically, although the committee had decided on Andrews Crescent. So it's really just to clarify that my understanding is that if, for example, there are some considerable disadvantages with Brown Village, that doesn't mean we couldn't look at it as to how it could become some new accommodation and mixed housing development for the future, and maybe the council can ask for that. But it's to clarify really that on Brahms Street, or the motorway as it's known, there are indeed 5 of our city housing complexes all along that road. It's just really to have that confirmed, and so I'll make some comments about why, in fact, and there's reference in the report too, and maybe you might like to speak to this, Carolyn, in relation to a geographical spread, but some communities not being overloaded with social housing for their own communities.
Yep. Carolyn.
So, thank you. So, part of the exemplars, and that's why Richard Osborne is here alongside me today, under the Land Use Recovery Plan, we as council have an opportunity to show really good design, new ways of doing things, and particularly with social housing. So we have to agree on 2 sites as exemplars under the LURP. So this is the reason for this paper here. Now, in terms of consideration of the exemplars, one site, Andrews Crescent, which, as you've identified in the Spraden Heathcote ward, has already been approved by council as an exemplar, or has been approved as a preferred candidate, I think is the correct terminology. The other 3 sites that we bring to you today, Brown Village, which of course is a really large site in the Spraden Heathcote. We've got Carey Street and Coles Place. And I suppose from a staff perspective, when we considered which of these 3 sites could be assessed as an exemplar, we were looking to have a disbursement across the city in terms of social housing. And Richard, I'm sure, from a LURP perspective, could inform us about the potential for identifying other sites as exemplars in future years for social housing. So I think that was a long conversation that we had at the Housing Committee, was after we've identified 2 sites, would there be an opportunity to identify other sites down the track for this?
Pauline.
Thank you. Yes, we did discuss this extremely robustly for quite a long time. We do have a housing crisis. We've got a huge shortage. We've got the Brown Village, which is the site, which is huge at 16,744 square metres. Currently, out of 89 units, there are only 3 occupied, with the potential to build up to 136 new ones on there, as opposed to Carey, which has 32 units on it, all occupied, with the potential to build between 30 and 40. That's an increase of up to, 18. And Coles Place, which has 20 on there, all occupied, with a potential to build 23 to 27, so an increase of a maximum of 7. So, and I know Bryam Street, it's TC3, which is a negative. The unit could be quite a bit of foundation cost there. But I think Bryam is an opportunity to lead the way with design-led intensification there. Whether we build social or mixed use there, I think that once we get the entity set up, there could be an option to do that rather than just social housing there. So I'm just explaining those numbers because I think it does show relevance. I'm listening to Phil as well because you're concerned about the intensity of social housing, but this has already been an existing social housing site. It's not like we're creating additional social housing in your ward there. So, but I understand where you're coming from there, but I do think we have to concentrate on the fact that this is not going to be built the way we used to build things. These are going to be efficient, warm, interesting, design-led. I think the location of Bryam is quite a good location in that it's really close to Polytech, to the bus routes, to Sydenham, to Beckenham, to the parks. So those are the advantages of Brougham. So I'm tending to support that, but I do have an open mind discussion.
Can I ask a question? If we, are we being required to choose one of these sites today? Because I wasn't, yeah, okay. So, but if we chose one of the other sites as the exemplar project, would that stop us looking at Brougham, for example, as an alternative, as a design-led alternative for some other, you know, based on other criteria? The only thing that worries me about that site is the entrance off Brougham Street doesn't exist, you know, so it's State Highway 73, and it has enormous challenges for that reason. But I mean, I totally hear what Pauline's saying about, you know, why would you disrupt a site that's got all of these people already living there in order to develop an exemplar project, rather than choose a site that's already almost completely empty and do it there. But I mean, I understand that the time frame is simply because of the land use recovery plan and our obligations under it. You know, a few other things have been, you know, allowed to slip on either side before, and I just wondered whether it had to be such a, you know, complete decision one way or the other today. But you're saying yes, it does. So, no, Ali was first. Yeah.
If I had known and if we knew a bit more about Brougham Street, I think that the arguments that Pauline makes would probably hold water a bit more. As far as the entrance goes, I don't know whether that can be addressed from another part of the site potentially, because that's clearly an issue as well. The biggest issue, and this is where the discussion was so split, is that I mean, there are clearly economies of scale as far as savings and efficiencies with budget that can be achieved through building so many houses on the one site like Brougham. However, the poor ground conditions, and it's not just that it's TC3, there's some perfectly fine land in TC3. It has gone beyond that and identified this land as hugely problematic. So the fact that the ground's poor, which could have delay and cost implications, really concerns me. If we don't know what those costs are, you could be up for anything from $5 to $5 million. You don't know. So without that information, I couldn't support the Brougham site. I also wondered too whether options around Brougham and its size hadn't been explored further, such as could it be done in a staged way? Could it be done on land that's better than other land on Brougham? So again, I felt that there wasn't enough information around this for us to be able to make a decision, and I'd supported the development of Carrie as an exemplar.
Yanni, and then Glenn, then Paul.
Thank you. Yeah, we're being looped again, so we've got timeframes in place that we have to meet. We don't have a choice.
Sorry, just a quiet point of order on this, Mayor, if I may. I'm not clear whether we're in question time or debate. We seem to be going over either. I'm ready to debate, but I'm not sure whether
this is a question, so I'll make it really short to
Yeah.
the point.
All right.
Given that we can't change, it's a question of staff. Given that we can't change the timeframes in loop because it's a statutory document and been agreed, what other process can we identify if we wanted to choose 2 exemplar projects today, but to look at Brougham Village and Airedale Court, which is another one where we've asked previously for information to come back around doing some planning around the future use of those sites? Is there another mechanism we can use through the land use recovery plan, like the community housing development mechanism or whatever those terms are, that would enable us to do some strategic planning around the future of Brougham and possibly Airedale?
Through you, Madam Chair.
Yep.
So Action 8 of the LERP definitely requires us to nominate 2 exemplars, but basically the LERP is up for review in March 2015. So I think if today the Council nominates the 2 which go forward at the moment, but if Council feels that there's other ones that should be included into the future, that's something we could discuss with the strategic partners about expanding the action with the potential for more exemplars being added to the list at a later date. Alternatively, I would imagine council could go through a process of its own volition to do a design-led, basically approach to Brome Street or other developments and develop them without using the land use recovery plan. But there might be other mechanisms in place that we could investigate for getting those off the ground quicker.
It seemed to me kind of the concern is that Brome sits there unutilised for 5 years. Same with Airedale. So I really want to see a process in place that gets action happening on those sites, given the scale and the opportunity. What sort of resolution would you require from us to give you that clear steer?
I don't know if it needs to be a LERP process as such. I mean, that might be what the council wants, and I think if that's the case, we would need to go back to the strategic partners and discuss that. I don't know if the Minister's going to be of a mind to amend it prior to the full review, which is in 10, 11 months' time. And when you work back from there, that time frame will need to start towards the end of this year, really. So if there's a direction of council that it does want to see further exemplars included within Action 8, then that's something that we could bring up with strategic partners, and perhaps the steering group which council has directed us to get together, that's the type of thing that could be discussed at that sort of level. So I don't know whether there needs to be a resolution today as part of this process, but it's certainly something that a direction could be made through the LERP steering group, which I've recently asked Democracy Services to set up.
Can I ask 2 questions about Brome Street? One is the what do you mean by the offer back provisions, and secondly, what do you mean by the ground conditions? Because I think Ali's raised a really good point about the quality of the land. We could choose that because it can produce the most houses, but it could be the most costly houses, and it actually could be the most delayed of all of the propositions for that reason. Yep.
Sorry, Lee Sampson, Project Manager, Facilities Rebuild. We've already done site investigations on Brome Street, so we've already, Opus have already done that work for us, so we know there's an issue there. We know that we need to do some ground remediation or 15-metre piles, so we know that there's an additional cost of up to 10% to the rebuild cost. So
is that 10% for the ground remediation?
That's a premium to a typical construction cost. Yep.
Is that on top of the 15-metre piles as well?
That includes the provision for the additional engineering.
So what's the land remediation required?
There's 2 options. Sorry, there's complete land remediation. So they basically, or there's a piled option, but we've actually put costs in for the we've put a cost in to cover. There's not a big difference between those 2 options in reality. So.
In cost terms?
Yes. Yeah.
What about in terms of the building itself?
Time frame, certainly. One of the main things about LERP is that we're supposed to be leading the market, and it doesn't for us at the moment offer a turnkey proposition because there's certainly additional programme implication.
Sorry, what does that mean?
Additional programme implication. So it could add a further 9 months, say, to the construction.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, sorry.
Time. Yeah, so 9 months, 10% extra in cost, and that's whether we go piles or whether we go land remediation.
That's correct, yeah. The other implications is it's still part of the global insurance settlement process, so we would be prejudiced in our current position, although there's a potential to, because it's still under negotiation as part of the global settlement process.
But I don't think no one disagrees that the place needs to be rebuilt, or is that still subject to? Don't answer the question.
That's still part of the process.
We'll sort that out later.
Yep.
But presumably that's a challenge with all 3 sites.
The issues are less onerous on the other sites because they're past their lifespan. There's very little of an insurance settlement claim to come to fruition.
And what do you mean by offer back provisions? May restrict the diversity of the housing that can be provided? Was the land gifted?
The land was it was a number of titles brought together under a public work. So there's a potentially onerous situation there in trying to,
Finding out who owned what.
basically, I think there was...
So if we built affordable housing on there as well as social housing, we'd be obliged to find out who owned the land and offer it back to them at market value before we could proceed.
That's correct. I think in memory there was 30 or 40 plus titles that they'd been...
Okay, and so, but we could, if we kept it all at social housing, that wouldn't trigger.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, now, who was next? I think Glenn, you were next? No, no
Just
question?
debating.
No, I had a list of people, sorry. No? Yeah, Paul?
I didn't have my hand up. I was going to go to debate, so the point of it was quite correct. The answers actually have been adequately answered by the various previous questions.
Good. Vicky?
Just in terms of the financing of this under the current structure, how is this to be financed from potential settlements? Because I've looked at your accounts and they're not stunning. So how are you paying for, say you were doing 100 houses, how are you paying for them? Or is it a PPP?
We're still working through that.
So in your head, what, like given that you've got very little in reserves,
Yes.
potentially some insurance, and a series of MOUs that you talk about in paragraph 3.4, you're going out for a request for proposals on whichever site which potentially may include a PPP.
Yes, that would be one of our options.
Well, actually, isn't it? How many other options are there?
Well, us financing it all?
Right, okay.
Borrowing to finance?
For a couple of the developments.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then,
And then taking it from there.
right.
So we would have to come back to you with that.
So what's the staff view around, say, the difference between Coles Place and Carey Place? Carey Street, rather, sorry.
There's obviously relative merits and demerits on each site. I'd say Carey Street would offer the most turnkey proposition. It's certainly the easiest developed, and it, with the constraints under LERP and us essentially leading the market, it gives us an option to do that. Carey Street is also an enhanced development mechanism under LERP, so it also gives us that opportunity to move fast under the additional enablers under the Sewer Act. And more two-bedrooms, sorry. Yeah. We've talked about the issues with Bram Street. Coles Place is in an area of high amenity. It's got great transport links. There is actually low levels of social housing in that locality, so that's a tick in the box from that perspective. That's probably as much as I can add at this point, unless
And
there's any...
what's the land like at two of those both places?
Carey Street is TC2, Coles Place is TC3, but there's nothing particularly prohibitive on that TC3 land.
No. Yep.
Further to that, because that was one of the key discussions at the committee meeting as well, there was an issue with land, which Phil was talking about as well, a reserve related to the development of Coles. Carey? So, and I don't know... No, it wasn't Carey, it was Andrews. And was it Andrews? Or anyway, sorry, I thought that was quite pertinent. But also, there is a real need for two-bedroom units. It's quite clear from the information that we've had that 2 beds are in huge demand, and so Carey provides or will provide for far more 2 beds than Coles, and also Carey provides for far more units. Is that correct? I'm just trying to encapsulate what we...
There is a list that compares what they build.
Yes,
so,
but it wasn't on the Carey list.
Yeah,
and so we
right.
had to get... Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The split, this is looking at the site context and the amenities and the locality. So the urban design team have looked at what would be an optimal mix. Carey Street offers 12 one-bedrooms, 24 two-bedrooms, 4 three-bedrooms. Coles Place would offer 3 1-beds, 18 2-beds, and 4 3-beds. So.
And timetabling for turnkey on Carey and Coles?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what we've got is an indication that there's an additional 9 months for Brum. So what's your timetable less that 9 months for these?
It's obviously subject to the processes the consultative processes
how many
underway.
months? It doesn't matter like the end date, but
Yeah, we've said 18 months. We've programmed out a high-level programme for 18 months for.
and that's for both.
That's both Carey and Coles.
And it's
and it's
another
the-
9 months on
it's the
top
plus,
of that.
plus 9 for Brum at
Yeah.
least, and there's a bigger scale to Brum, obviously.
Yep. Phil, question?
Could I just ask you another question about the concentration along Brown Street? Like my estimation, for example, of Andrews Crescent, the distance between there and Brown Street would probably only be about half a kilometre. Yes. So in fact, for 2 approximately.
About a kilometre, I think.
Or maybe a kilometre.
Yeah.
So you'd have 2 exemplars on the same motorway, only barely a kilometre apart, in terms of your geographical distribution, which you referred to earlier. Thanks, Carol.
So can I just list, I haven't got the Carey numbers sitting in front of me, so that I can put the numbers beside the Coles Place redevelopment, which helpfully has the numbers sitting alongside them. Can you just run through the units?
Sorry, we're referring to unit numbers.
Yeah, Coles Place have got the 2-storey, 3-bedroom, 4. Oh, sorry, you got them. Oh, sorry, I couldn't find that. Yeah, no, but what I was trying to do was get the number of bedrooms, so...
The number, would you like total numbers for each?
No, how many?
I just wanted to compare them, so that's all. So it was 18 versus 24 in Coles Place versus Carey.
That's correct, yeah.
So it's 3 versus 12, 1-bedroom, 18 versus 14, 3-bedroom, and 4 versus 4, 3-bedroom. So 2-bedroom, 3. So that's 25 versus 40.
That's
Obviously, Brougham is 136, but we wait another 9 months and pay more. Yep.
Okay,
Ref?
having not been involved in any of this, can we just vote on this and make a decision?
Yeah, we can, but we have to have a debate on it. So
I thought we just had a debate.
No, we didn't. We've been asking questions.
Okay.
So I think we've clarified the questions. Everyone knows what the decision is that they want to vote for. So now I'm going to ask people who want to debate it. Glenn and then Pauline.
Thank you. One of the purposes of endorsing a site for exemplar is found in one of the criterion there, which is known as diversity. And I think this is something we need to take pretty seriously. When we're talking about social housing these days, we're talking about a kind of heterogeneous approach rather than a kind of homogenous understanding which we may have of social housing traditionally. Colloquially, some people will call that a kind of ghettoisation, but our development over this has grown that that we now see that whether you live in a social house, in social housing, affordable rental, home ownership, that in terms of typology, that may not necessarily be that apparent in your local neighbourhood. What I'm going to say about Brougham, the truth of the matter is we have to do something with it at some point anyway. I will go with the wisdom of the council today, obviously. What I would say is we did have the 3-way split. We tried to resolve it, but we couldn't, and that's not a bad thing. There's some really good, compelling arguments all round. what I would say in terms of quantity for that part of the debate, we have a growing waiting list. We have homelessness in the CBD, exacerbated by the quakes. It's in our suburbs. I know of 100 and at least one suburb from outright without any shelter to living in garages, couch surfing, etc. And if the New Zealand definition of homelessness is truly applied, the numbers would be much greater than we would actually want to entertain. We have a big problem given both the quality, the lack of shelter in the city and the quality. So it's a habitability question as well. I know of one house where 25 people are living in that house. I mean, you know, is that acceptable? Is that the kind of community we want? We need to do something with Brougham anyway. Development at some point will be required. Whichever option we go for today will be subject to consultation once we've worked through when our affordable housing and social housing policy and the accord will go out for consultation. Another aspect of the report which could be easily missed is at the top of the page 348 about safety. One of the criterion is about safety, and what I would like us to move towards in the future is something along the lines of what Aviva is doing with their Safe at Home program. So that's building physical safety into their housing. That's part of my vision, and that's something we'll start to work through following a workshop, which you can see. So I accept this will be a council decision. Please remember there are people in our city who do not absolutely have any shelter at all. It's a critical situation. There's debate over whether it's a crisis or not. Definition of crisis is something that affects the community. This is having a profound effect on our community. Yes, in the case of Brougham, there may be an additional wait of 9 months. There may be an additional foundational cost of 10%. But think also of the social costs of people waiting for shelter, which can also be translated into financial cost as well. So I trust the wisdom of the council and know we'll make a good decision here. From my point of view, I've worked this through. Brougham offers the greatest yield of an extra 47 units, Kerry an extra 8 and Coles 3. That notwithstanding, I will go with and support the eventual resolution of the council on this.